Evening, everyone. It's Tony here from Locks to Read. It's been a while since I did my last update. I thought I'd do a quick end of month review because I don't think I'm likely to read anything else at this point. I have only read this month um, a few. What have I read this month? 3, 6, 8 books this month, which are A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, Ringworld by Larry Niven, Selected Poems by Adoni, Sea Scraper by Benjamin Wood, The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov, Cultural Amnesia, Notes on the Margins of My Time by Clive James, Cop Hater by Ed McBain, and Piers Plowman by William Langland. Which seems like a small amount of books, but Cultural Amnesia is about 900 pages. Um, so it's a chunky boy. And that was a reread, actually a multiple reread times X, um, because it's one of my favourite books. It normally starts. I'll start with Cultural Amnesia because it's the one basically, it's written by Clive James, and it is a series of quotes from notes he's taken from reading over time, and it's ordered by person in alphabetical order. So it starts with Anna Akhmatova. I can't remember who it ends with. Zinoviev. Anyway, it ends with a Z person, and each chapter deals with the quotes. Sometimes there's more than one quote from the writer, but and he draws conclusions from those quotes. He has arguments with them, or he agrees with them. It's a mixed bag of people. It's poets, it's musicians, it's dictators. It's mostly authors and a lot of literary critics. And he sort of uses it to analyse the what I'm going to call the long 20th century, which I think we really are in the tail end of. I think Clive James, who died, I think in 2018, would be very disappointed with the world as it stands now. I think when he finished Cultural Amnesia, he had some hope for the future, but I think current events would probably have depressed him intensely. It's as I said, what did he and I find it a fascinating read. I've read it a lot, and it normally starts off because I'm thinking about somebody in particular, and I think, oh, that person is in Cultural Amnesia. Let's show the cover on my phone if I can do it. Oh, we'll come on to him in a minute. Hang on. Oh, organisation, it's so good. Let's go back to the photos. Let's see if we can get that to come up in a way you can actually see it. The light's not very good for here. There you go. Cultural Amnesia. Hope you can see that reasonably well. So I go, oh, actually, I'll look up the chapter on Anna Akhmatova because there's a quote in there, blah, blah, blah. And then what I always go is, oh, actually, I might as well reread the whole thing. And then gradually, over the course of several weeks, I reread the whole thing. I can't recommend it enough. I think there's a couple of chapters which I think are sort of placeholders, not placeholders, just filler material. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there about how the responsibility of literary figures to the crisis of their time. And he is scathing about those that refuse to step up, and complimentary about those who didn't and who suffered as a consequence. I think it's an amazing book. I like Clive James's style of writing, which is complicated but clear. I think he has a very set. He can be quite. Sometimes you read it and you think there's a boast in here, and I think he had an ego. But I find it. I can't recommend it enough. I think it's a good way of trying to get your head around the 19th and 20th centuries, as a sort of on an introductory basis. Next up, I'll talk about Cop Hater by Ed McBain. Um, you're not going to be able to see that, are you? Without me twisting it into. Ooh, look at me twisting around, twisting around, twisting around. Anyway, we'll worry about that later. Um, it's the first book in the 87th Precinct series. It was written in the 50s. It's a detective story, but it's probably the first story where a group of detectives are the lead characters. It isn't. It doesn't have a maverick, random member of the public doing the investigating and making the police look like fools. Um, it covers the whole sort of basic rule of police officers in a murder investigation. This one just happens to be the murder of police officers. Um, he does stop occasionally to drop some information from the research he's done, which is a very Dan Brown thing to do. But mostly it's really well paced. The characters are strong, and you get a real feeling for the time and the place. Apparently, the series, there are 50 plus books in the series. I, I liked it enough that I might read another one and see how it goes. I'm not sure if I'll ever work my way through the whole series. 50 books is a lot. But if you like a detective story, if you like a thriller, I would say go for it, because it didn't take long to read because it's quite short and it's sort of like, it sort of feels like it feels like a sort of combination of a noir novel and a Dan Brown book, in the sense of the information drops. But I really enjoyed it, and I think I tried to read it once when I was a teenager, and I really didn't get on with it. But this time I found it much more interesting and much more, and it was a page turner in that sense. I couldn't put it down. Then there is Isaac Asimov's The Gods Themselves, which is a late Asimov. It was written in '74, I think, or maybe even later than that. Hang on, 1972. It's I didn't really enjoy it as much as I enjoy Asimov's robot stories um, or Foundation, but it's been a while since I read Foundation, or the first trilogy of Foundation. It's a sort of end of the world story, a sort of climate change writ large story. In fact, one of the funniest things about this book is he mentions climate change in it, and he wrote it in 1972. So people have known about climate change for a long time. Basically, it's set in the future. There's a thing called an electron pump, which involves exchanging energy across two different universes. But it looks like it all seems to be going very well. But there starts to be this idea that it is at risk of destroying the sun. Now, the first chapter is set on Earth, and the first section is set on Earth, and it is about one scientist who has started to sort of go down that route. His friend, who's trying to translate the messages from this alternative universe, it's not even this other universe, and they're sort of struggling to, and then it jumps to, then there's in terms of world building, this is a really good world building book, because there's the Earth, this alternative universe, and this this species that is in humanity, and then about how everybody is trying to work out what the problems and deal with the problems. There's lots of actual science, or sort of science with a science fiction twist, if you know what I mean. Asimov was a scientist, so he's quite good at sticking to reasonable arguments. Apparently, the reason he wrote this book was to do with somebody said they started talking about an element that couldn't possibly exist, or not an element, a variation on an element that could possibly exist, and then a friend said to him, "Well, why don't you try writing a story where it does, and come up with a reason why it does?" Which is where this story came from. It's very well written. It just wasn't really. I don't know. It just didn't excite me very much. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend reading it, because I think and it's considered to be. I think Asimov thought it was considered it to be his best book, from what I've sort of gleaned. Um, but yeah, odd one. Not sure where to go with that. Um, I would say read it. I think you should. My view is always don't. You should never trust my judgment. You should always make your own call on things. I am notoriously amongst my friends able to get through books that are very boring to them. And I also very rarely DNF anything because I hate DNFing it. I feel that finishing a bad book is partly punishment for the soul. But this wasn't a bad book. I wouldn't want you to think this is a bad book. This is a good book. This is an interesting book, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. Um, then, I'll talk about the Sea Scraper by Benjamin Wood. That is the first of the Booker Prize 2025 long list books that I've read. I swore this year that I wasn't going to read the Booker Prize long list because the last 2 years have been such a disappointment in terms of just a lot of very average books, and I can't work out what the decision making process is for how they get on the long list, how they get on the thought list, short list, and how they actually win. I won't rant about Prophet Song again, but that was a real the Booker Prize people don't know what the hell they're doing moment. But I thought I'd read Seascape because it sounded quite interesting. It's set in the 50s, 60s, and the main character still fishes for shrimp in an old-fashioned way using a horse and cart, pulling a net through the sea. He's got a very limited life, but he wants to be a folk singer. He's bought a guitar and he's hidden it in the shed so his mum can't see it. They don't have a particular. There's no father in the picture. I think his father's died and the grandfather's just died. It's the grandfather used to do the fishing, the thing. It's got a great. I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed it. It was nice to read a book. Oh, and then as the story goes, he gets involved with a film director, and that gets tied up in the story. And then there's a woman that he likes, and then the film director's story turns out to be more complicated than it looks at first, and maybe there's some mental health issues there, and blah blah blah. And the book actually has a relatively it's an open, but I'm not going to spoil it, but an open ending that isn't. And actually, it's quite nice to read a book of contemporary fiction that isn't entirely written contemporarily, even though it's a historical book, that isn't entirely depressing or entirely bog standard, middle of the road, middle class family drama, or thinly disguised biography. I have recently come to read not like contemporary fiction, but I think that's because I'm not reading the good stuff a lot of the time. I'm just reading books that sound and I make the mistake of reading too many book prize lists as opposed to listening to people who know what they're talking about, and then I read really bad. Well, not bad. Most of them aren't bad. Most of them are just bang average. But I would say Sea Scraper deserves. I enjoyed reading it. I think it's very well written. It comes dangerously close to overwriting at some points, but he manages to escape it. And there's a real. He's really good at capturing the atmosphere, and I like the main character. And I like the fact that it isn't, as I said, it isn't incredibly depressing, even though you might think at the start it's going to be incredibly depressing. So yeah, Sea Scraper, I would say read it. It's quite short. It's under 200 pages, I think. But yeah, I enjoyed it. These are very bad. Anyway, I'm not going to go on to a thing. And then finally, William Langland's Piers Plowman. This is a prose translation by A.V.C. Schmidt of a Middle English elusive and alliterative poem. It is a series of dreams and dreams within dreams, and it's basically about how a person should live a good Christian life, how society is being wrecked by greed at all levels, but particularly the ignorance and greed of the clergy, um, who come in for a lot of stick in this. This was written around the time of the Peasants' Revolt and sort of after the Black Death had raged through England, um, and you get that vibe from it of um, a society in flux, um, a society where the poor are um, left to their own suffering, um, and the wealthy only support the wealthy, and those who rule protect those who rule. Um, not like 2025 in any way whatsoever, um, but it's basically trying to say this is how you should live your life. It's done in with like illusion. There's characters in it called like Patience, and it's a bit like John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress in that sense. Um, but it's done in a series of they're called passus, but they're visions effectively. And then there's and in a couple of them there's an inner dream within the vision. Um, I would like to read a proper poetic translation of this as opposed. This is good though. I mean, this is a solid translation. There's a lot of notes because there's a lot of stuff in here that you need help to understand, not just references, but sort of the thrust of an argument that you probably don't understand 630 odd years later. Um, and Schmidt does a very good job of with his introduction and with the notes to give you an understanding of the poem. It has come down in here. Sort of there are three surviving. Well, there are three different versions of it, maybe four, but that might be a cobbled together version of a couple of the first two. They're called A, B, C, and Z, I think, from what I remember. B is the one. This is the translation of B, which is which is A is like. It might not be this, but A is like a first draft. B is like an expanded edition, tweaked a little bit because of the events of the Peasants' Revolt. I don't know what's happening with the lighting here, by the way, today. It looks like I'm in a very yellow room, and it's not really like that. It might not look as bad when you see it, but anyway, waffle, ramble, blah, blah, blah. There's a couple of things I would flag up. One, it has a certain amount of medieval anti-Semitism in it, and misunderstanding of Islam based on what was known, stroke thought at the time. It's also raises a couple of my issues with Christianity, and how it's used. The tendency to portray suffering and poverty as noble, and that your reward for that suffering and that poverty will come in heaven. I think it leads to people who have a vested interest in the status quo trying to make Christians as passive as possible. Obviously, history is littered with Christians that were not passive, and who helped lead revolutions and revolts and whatever. But that is one of my sort of queries sometimes with how people in religious authority try and persuade people to just act as if there's nothing that needs to change. It's also the sort of book that you might want to hit a very fundamentalist right-wing Christian with, because it makes a lot of points about love thy neighbour, love thy enemy, give money to. Why are you giving? Why are you helping rich people get more money? You should be helping the poor and the sick, and protect them from the worst parts of that suffering. I mean, it makes you realise that there's a chunk of American evangelical Christianity that's basically blasphemy, and that unfortunately that branch of American evangelical Christianity seems to have control of a lot of money and a lot of an ear to people in positions of power. I really liked it. I was surprised that I liked it as much as I did, but it did make me realise something. This was going to be part of my. I a long time ago decided I was going to read the canon. I've talked about this before, and I was going to do it in as chronological order as I could, starting with the Epic of Gilgamesh and working my way through as far as I get before I die. And it made me realise that the reason I chose to do that is because it makes if I'd read, I kind of read everything that Langland references in that. Some of it doesn't exist. Some of it's very obscure theological books from the 12th, 13th century, written in Latin that might not have even been translated. Well, it must have been translated for that. But a lot of the basic references, the biblical references, the references to St. Augustine, the church father, and the other major church fathers, all of that stuff I might have had more of an awareness of, so I didn't have to keep referring back to the end notes. I hate end notes anyway, but I understand why in a book like that you need them, because otherwise you'd have like pages that are a third of actual text and a 2/3 end footnotes. But it does make for it does break up your reading experience, having to constantly, like virtually every page has 2 or 3 end notes on it. But I really enjoyed it. It's a very interesting read, and it's and it has some contemporary relevance, even though it was written in probably about 1390, somewhere between 1377 and 1390, something like that. It's a big period, but nobody really knows. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I've got a poet. I've got another translation that's the Norton one, which is a poetic translation, which I will read at some point. And obviously, being a Norton Critical Edition, it's got lots of notes again, but it's also got essays and stuff that are worth reading. So that's basically what I read in August. I don't think anything was bad. There was some bang average stuff. Well, I think actually bang average. The only bang average thing was probably the gods themselves. But there was some interesting stuff. I got distracted, like I always do, from my plans. I haven't read any of the library books that I was supposed to read, apart from the gods themselves. I got distracted a bit by some theatre reading, because I was sorting out through books, and I found my copy of Kenneth Tynan's theatre writings, which I bought back in 2008 when I got really into going to the theatre, and I thought actually I would quite like to reread that, which meant that I also got out my copy of oh god, this is heavy. Shakespeare by Macbean, which I bought at the Royal Shakespeare Company shop when I went to the Royal Shakespeare Company Sheffield upon Avon. Unfortunately, I have since spilt water all over the bottom of it. But this has a great section on Macbean. Was a photographer, and there's a great section to start on this. And then there's a series of, it's basically a picture of various Royal Shakespeare Company productions from the 40s and 50s. They are there's some beautiful pictures in there. I think he set a standard for photography of Shakespeare plays, and I think some of those are in the Kenneth Tynan book, because they are sort of very vaguely contemporaneous. So it's good to be able to flick and look at the costumes. My plans for September are doing a separate video, probably tomorrow, maybe the 2nd. As this is already going to be 25 minutes by the time I finish. I hope that's interesting. I feel like I've just been waffling today. I'm not in the best of minds, and I'm angry with myself about some things. So I haven't really been in the right frame of mind. I am behind. I'm supposed to be reading the next 3 books of Anthony Power's Dance to the Music of Time with Alyssa at Nerdy Nurse Reads. I still haven't read book 3 yet. Alyssa's finished books, is waiting for me to finish patiently. I might just tell her to get on with it and I'll catch up. And I haven't got a clue what I'm going to read in September at the moment. I'm going to think about it this evening and and dig in. But yeah, so there we are. That was my August reading. Yeah, things will get better. All right, have a good one. Bye bye.